Today's scripture reading is from the book of Matthew in the New Testament, chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come share your master's happiness.
The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I know that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is God's word.
Stories and songs. It's what we've been thinking about our whole year in our sermons since last August. Much of the Bible, most of the Bible is written either in narrative or in poetry, lyrical form, stories and songs. And I think in our own lives, right, so much of our lives are shaped by stories and songs. We remember our lives oftentimes based in story form and connected to songs. So, for instance, like I know you probably, if you're like me, you make Spotify playlists. I have a summer 2018 playlist. Before there was Spotify and those kinds of playlists, though, I can look back in my life. 1973, Elton John, Yellow Brick Road. And I know that, and Benny and the Jets, I know those songs, and it reminds me, I know it dates me seriously, it reminds me of what was going on in my life when I was 8 years old. And, fast forward a few years later, 77 around there, Billy Joel, The Stranger. Oh my goodness, I can remember, it's not just the songs, I picture myself in my room. I wanted to memorize that whole album. I'm not sure I was successful at it, but the earworm kind of thing, it's stuck over the years and takes me to those memories. Stories and songs work together. They're really powerful, I think, in that way in our life. The great modern artist, Beyonce, was the first to put out a video album, and she said this. She said, I wanted people to hear the songs with the story that's in my head because that's what makes it mine. Stories and songs, they're powerful in our own life. They're powerful in the scriptures. And this morning we're looking at a really powerful, important story that Jesus told right before he died. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the sheep and the goats, which we think was his last story. This comes right before that. So it's like Jesus has this story, but the song that's playing over is just looping over and over in his mind as he's telling this story is I'm about to die. And here's what my life has all been about. And so you can just imagine he's very sharpened in his focus. And therefore, it's a story that's definitely, it's got some weight to it, some intensity. Jesus wants us to have clarity about what our lives are all about by looking at this story. And by thinking about the gold that's given, the return that comes, and the happiness that awaits. First of all, the gold that's given. Now, this story is actually like the one last week, the parable of the Good Samaritan, one of the most famous stories of all. In that, they're both about a man who goes on a journey. The parable of the Good Samaritan, it's a tragedy because the man, it starts with this man, we don't know much about him, just getting beaten up, robbed, left with nothing, left for dead. This one is about a man also on a journey, very wealthy man, who's getting ready to go away, as it turns out, for a long time. And so he calls together 3 of his servants, most trusted servants apparently, because they're going to manage his estate while he's gone. And he entrusts to them the responsibility to take care of all of his welfare, financially speaking. And so he gives to them bags of gold. Now, some of you may know this story as the parable of the talents, because the word talent is found in a lot of the other English translations. We're looking at the NIV, which has bags of gold, and I'll explain why the NIV has taken this route. Because talent over time has been misunderstood as like, oh, well, boy, you're really talented at that. And that's what it's talking about. No, not so much. I mean, it applies, actually, as we'll look at in a minute. But talent was an ancient form of currency, measure of currency, that was either in gold or silver. At 1 talent was a massive amount of money. So if you take the price of gold in June 2018, just a month ago, guess what 1 talent is worth based on the price of gold today? $1.4 million. And so he calls these 3 together, and he says, you're going to be in charge of my estate. He gives to one of them 5 talents, to one of them 3 talents, and one of them 1 talent. 5 bags of gold, 3 and 1. Now, go and invest. And so it says, to one he gave 5 bags of gold. I forgot I was supposed to read this one. To another 2 bags of gold, to another 1 bag, and each according to his ability. And then he went on his journey. But think about this for just a second. What are they supposed to do with that now? You've been given that responsibility. What are you going to do with it? That's the question. Well, it says the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once, put his money to work, and gained 5 more bags. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Now, what are we supposed to take away from this? Let's just stop there for a minute. Bags of gold. It is talking about money, but see, it's a story about money, but it's not really about money per se. It's using money as a framework, a word picture to help us think about what? All of life. All of life, he's saying through the lens of this story, is something that you're entrusted with. It's yours in a sense, but it's also something that's been given to you, an entrustment, so that in every sphere of life, we're not owners so much as we are money managers, okay? We are stewards, to use an older term. We have a fiduciary responsibility in all areas of our life before the owner, is what the story is saying to us. And therefore, it's encouraging us to ask some questions. First of all, what are your bags of gold? You've got them. You're like, I am dead poor. I'm telling you. No, you have things in your life that are responsibilities, abilities, entrustments. And then the question is, what are you doing with them? Are you just spending your life? Are you investing your life? Are you storing up? Are you burying your life away? Or are you utilizing it for its highest purpose? Are you maximizing life is really the question. Or are you wasting it? There's a book by John Piper called Don't Waste Your Life. I think that's the title of it. Read it a number of years ago. We waste our lives when we do not pray and think and dream and plan and work toward magnifying God in all spheres of life. God created us for this, to live our lives in a way that makes Him look more like the greatness and the beauty and the infinite worth that He really is. See, of course, the man in the story, the wealthy one who's going away on a journey, is God. And this is an idea that's very rich in the Scriptures, really from the first pages, that we are given great dignity by being created in God's image, but then entrusted with all of God's creation. Everything in life is a stewardship, and we're actually responsible for everything in the world. And therefore, it has the possibility of radically reformatting the way you think of all spheres of life, doesn't it? And the Apostle Paul, in some of his writing, helps us along with some thoughts. He says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for humans. And whatever you do, in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. So the ultimate purpose in all of life, in every area of life, is that we are to do it to honor God, to glorify Him, to make His name famous and magnify it. Now, there's all sorts of spheres. It's all spheres of life, remember. So let's just think for a second about two spheres of life. You could pick many. One area that we've looked at the last 2 weeks, so I'm not going to focus on it in this sermon, is our responsibility towards the least of these, towards the poor, those who have been dealt a hand of injustice. Let's think about two areas today, briefly. First of all, the area of work, because a lot of us spend a lot of our lives in work. And secondly, the area of relationships in life. So think, first of all, of the area of work. Do you think of your work as a bag of gold or boring? And if you're a student, fit yourself into this same question. This thinking that we are to do everything for the Lord, for His glory, not for other people, can radically change the way that you think about work. Why? Because if you are stuck working under an oppressive boss, someone who doesn't get you, you feel used by them, then it can just make work not only boring, but oppressive. But what it's saying there is, what Paul was saying is, no, you are working not for that person. That's at best the penultimate person that is your boss. You have an ultimate boss, and therefore, everything you do is transformed with great meaning. I remember I was telling someone the other day about this. My very first job, I think, I got a job through my father, and so I thought, I'm going to have some really important responsibilities. My responsibility for weeks on end was to file things in a filing cabinet. Now, to those of you under like 25, files are these, they're hard copy documents of things that go into cabinets. And so but it was so dull. I didn't know this was possible. I fell asleep standing up filing. It was so dull. But it's because I didn't get it. It wasn't ultimately for that person. It was, for him, it can radically change the way you think about work. It means, therefore, the purpose of your job is never about the bottom line, about making money so you can live life at your discretion, so you can, create a life of constant pleasure and happiness. Neither is it for you to climb up the ladder of life in the vocational world so you can have a more lucrative position, be more influential. It's so that you can make his name great. And therefore, any job, there is no menial job, even filing. It is for his glory and honor. Massive worth infused. Okay, that's work. So much we could say there. Secondly is our relationships with people. Now, let's just take marriage, for instance. I know a lot of you are not married, but just think in terms of marriage. I've just had my 30th anniversary, so I'm thinking a lot about this. You know, if you go into marriage following the typical Western narrative, you know, the prince marries the princess, finds the princess, and they live what? Happily ever after. It is a story about happily ever after. You will be seriously disillusioned very quickly. Because see, what it's saying is, oh, you found this soulmate. Oh, don't even get me started on that one. You found this one who's going to make you, what? Happy. What is that really saying? Your framework for marriage is really about self-fulfillment. That is a terrible place to go for self-fulfillment. Self-awareness, yes, if you're willing. But see, if you go into marriage saying, this is a calling from the one who invented marriage to make him famous through my humility and service in the marriage, that other person that he's wedded me to might find joy and happiness in life, not me. And the strange thing, of course, is the upside down way of Christianity is that when you do that, then you, lo and behold, you find that deep subterranean happiness. Relationships beyond marriage, because this applies in the same way, we tend to enter into relationships to use people, if we're honest. I know that sounds very dark, but we want something from people, and so we will pull people into our social network to boost our sagging ego, to help us in life, to help us network, whatever it may be. If we're honest about that, and we see the purpose that this is an investment, an entrustment that God has given you, then you will throw caution to the wind. You will be a risky person in your relationships because the point of your relationship isn't what you will get, but how to give. Just those two areas. Now, I think this is one of the things that's comical about living in Houston this time of year is, you know, even though it's blistering hot outside, you can be in your vehicle, you can be in your car, and as long as the air conditioning's running long enough, you can be nice, you know, and cozy, even like it's chilly, like some of you feel here right now. And yet, as soon as you open the door and get out of the car, if you're wearing sunglasses or glasses, you know, you're in a fog. It's poignant spiritually, I think, because I think we live a lot of our lives in all the spheres of our life in the fog. We have clarity, and then as soon as we open the door, boom, the fog hits. This story is saying, take off those lenses, put on the lenses of this story, and see all the gold that's been given to you. Don't bury it. Don't spend it on your pleasures. It's an entrustment. Use it to make his name great. And you know what? You'll benefit. There'll be a return. So that's the goal that's given. Let's look secondly at the return that comes. Now, this is a double entendre, the word return there. There's double meanings going on here, at least in the way that I'm using it, because this story is about the return of the man who goes away. Who's the man who goes away, by the way? Jesus, okay? Jesus goes away for a long time, and there's going to be a day, though, even if you don't believe it's true, like probably the third servant in this story, where he's going to come back. He's going to return. And it says, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. So that is the day. It's imagining the day when he's going to come back and settle his accounts with us. And, so what did that look like? Well, what was the return for the first two of those money managers? Well, it's interesting. As we looked at earlier, the one guy has given 5 bags of gold, 5 talents $7 million in today's funds. What was his return? He went and invested it. What was his return? 100%. That's pretty good. $14 million. Man, score. What about the second of the servants? So he had three, about $4.2 million. Also 100% return. He doubles as well. Okay? And what does God say to them? Excuse me, what does the man say? It is God. What does the man say? The owners say to them, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." Now, I want you to notice a couple of things there. First of all, that he says the same thing to both of them. He didn't say, "Wow, you that had 5 and turned it into 10. Man, you get really promoted, and you did okay as well." No, he gives the exact same thing. Why? One reason is because God doesn't judge or view us based on a success paradigm, but a faithfulness paradigm. It's not about our performance, but about his pleasure in us obeying him. The other thing to notice is that we shouldn't look at one guy as better than the other because he was entrusted with more. Because that's not how God looks at it. Because he gives them the same reward at the end. And, it makes me think of when I was first starting out in ministry. I worked with college students, and it was at a college conference in Florida where one of the guys, older campus ministers, a crusty kind of funny guy named Hal Farnsworth, was teaching a seminar, and so I snuck away and went into his seminar that he was teaching. And I remember he was teaching on this, on the parable of the talents, the bags of gold. And he says, some of you are bitter because you're jealous that you don't have what the person next to you had. You don't have their finances. You don't have their looks. Maybe you don't have their intelligence, their opportunities. They don't have their girlfriend or their boyfriend or their spouse or whatever. He said, you will just be suffocated in life by that bitterness that comes from comparing yourself to others. But what if you see life through the lens that God has given to you what you have? You have what you have by the grace of God. And then he used the metaphor of playing cards. He says, some of you have been dealt a royal flush, and that's a really great thing. That is awesome. Unless you're the person sitting next to them and you've been dealt a pair of twos. The question, he said, and this is really the question that I want to ask myself and ask you, regardless of whether you've got a royal flush or a pair of twos or something in between, are you able to be grateful for what you have? Are you able to see it as a bag of gold or 3 or 5 given to you that you might make his name great? It's a powerful teaching. And not only did he give them the same commendation, but their reward, their ultimate reward, was beyond phenomenal. Heaven. And I know that for some of you, the story that you have of heaven probably seems kind of dull, like you're floating through heaven, on a bunch of clouds with some cherub angels. They're cute for a little while, but it's kind of dull. But that's not the picture the Bible presents of heaven. It's actually this other dimension. It's not so much out there as here among us in another dimension. And when Jesus returns, you know what he's going to do? He's going to merge that world with this world. And this will be a renewed heaven on earth. And it's going to be the place of ultimate happiness for sure. But we're not going to just be chilling all the time. I'm sorry about that. We're going to be working hard. And if work seems futile or meaningless now, it will not be that way for a second in heaven. We're going to be serving him. All right, so that's the first 2 servants. What about the other servant and his return? It's not not so good. Master, he said, I know that you're a hard man and harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seeds. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. He was entrusted with one, and he returned to him one. And why did he do that? Well, by his own self-description, it was because of fear. And why? Why was he fearful? Because of what he thought, no, what he believed to be true about the man, about the owner. Now, this is where people like me love applicational points in a sermon, because this is where I get to tell you that theology is not just theoretical, abstract mumbo-jumbo. It is absolutely critical to how you live in every sphere of life. Now, when I say the word theology, what comes to mind? It might be just, something that this ivory tower that you can't get your hands or mind around. It literally means the study of God. And do you know that you don't have the luxury of whether or not you have a theology? Every single one of us have a theology. The question is, how underdeveloped is it? Now, some of us have overdeveloped theologies. That's all we're obsessing about. But that's not the point either. The Bible is always about theology unto doxology. It's never just to live up here in the cerebral sphere, but to trickle down until it not contaminates, but catches fire in the soul and you become alive, see. It is so important. In fact, I remember long ago reading a book by A.W. Tozer, who said, what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. See, so if this guy is telling the truth, and you translate it from the owner to God, then he's saying, I was scared. That's why I didn't act. That's why I was just found myself paralyzed and immobile, because I found you to be a harsh man. Listen, as I talk to people who are in process spiritually, and who is not in process spiritually in here? But I mean, people who are really struggling with what they believe, oftentimes it's because they have a view of God that is underdeveloped. They view God as a harsh man. He is that stern judge. He's always watching, and I want that monkey off my back so I can be free, right? But that's not at all how the Bible presents God. He is a God who will come, and he will put wrongs to right. And there is a real heaven, and there is a real hell. But he is a God who brings about justice through giving himself for us. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But that was the problem with this guy. Had an underdeveloped view of theology that left him in a really bad, paralyzed place. I wonder if you can identify with that. But you can probably more easily identify with the analysis of the man. So the guy said, here's my view. You're a bad man, and I fear you. That's why I did what I did. I was risk averse. What was going to happen to me if I didn't deliver anything to you? You only gave me one. But God said, no, that's ridiculous. Your problem, you know what it is? You're lazy. Okay. Easiest applicational point of the sermon. Do you struggle with laziness? My sister has on her refrigerator this New Yorker cartoon that I just absolutely love. Okay, be honest. The doc is saying, how much are you exercising? We all struggle. I remember this one professor in seminary that I admired so much. I'm not going to tell you his name, but this guy is iconic, an amazing person. I remember him telling me one time, Leo, I'm a really lazy man. I laughed. And he said, no, I'm being totally honest. I struggle with laziness in virtually every area of my life. And that was destabilizing to me as a young lad that I was at that point. But you know what? Over the years, I look back and I've so admired his self-awareness. Because when we're not aware that we're lazy, that we're not all that we could be, we're not as much of a steward as we could be in a certain area of life, then we're going to just be self-delusional and prideful in that area. But back to the lazy man, the third servant. See, you know what the great tragedy is here? That what he wanted, like the other two servants, ultimate happiness, he didn't get. He didn't get the return that he wanted. It was a massive cosmic miscalculation on his part. And I wonder, with him and with us, why does that happen? Why do we develop twisted views of God that lead to us being paralyzed and risk-averse spiritually instead of throwing ourselves into the ocean of who God is? I think it's because we get stuck in stories from our past, moments in our past, and the songs that kind of just are like rattling, cacophonous rackets. One of the great creatives, I think, of our day, in my opinion, Noah Hawley, he's the creative behind the TV show Fargo and wrote this book a couple of years ago before the fall. He said this is a powerful quote, in my opinion. What if instead of a story told in consecutive order, so purely linear, life is a cacophony of moments we never leave? So cacophony, there's the song part. What if the most traumatic or the most beautiful experiences we have trap us in a kind of feedback loop where at least some part of our minds remains obsessed even as our bodies move on? Wow. I think that's one of the reasons that we don't get the return on life that we would like to get a lot of times, because we get stuck in the bad things that happen to us, or we have good things and we confuse those with ultimate good and happy things, and we get stuck there and trapped there. And so we exchange ultimate gratification for immediate. That's the goal that's given, the return that comes, and finally the happiness that awaits. The happiness that awaits. Because though the massive cosmic miscalculation of the third servant did not give him the return that he wanted, the other two, the first two servants, of course, got the ultimate reward, the happiness that awaits. It wasn't just that they got greater responsibilities. You're going to have a fantastic job opportunity in heaven. That is true. It is that you enter in to what your soul has been longing for all along. He said, come and share your master's happiness. Isn't that what we all want? Isn't that what we all long for? But if we're honest, like that professor of mine years ago, don't we find ourselves identifying far too often with that third servant? A little bit too paralyzed, a little bit too lethargic, a little bit too underdeveloped, perhaps, in our view. And so the great news of Christianity is that God did not leave ultimate happiness up to us. If he had, wow, that would have been disastrous. When God wanted us to enjoy ultimate happiness, okay, he didn't give us a pat on the back and wish us good luck. He didn't, from the confines of the world of happiness in heaven, he didn't give us a lesson on happiness. He didn't send us happy thoughts via Instagram, okay? He left his happiness behind and became, as the prophet Isaiah described him to be, a man of sorrow. And Jesus, on the last night of his life, surrounded by his best friends who would end up deserting him, he said, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Why? Why would he be such a sorrowful man? Because of the cost that was absolutely necessary to secure our happiness. One of the great storytellers, short storytellers, Flannery O'Connor, hits on this, another brilliant quote, in my opinion. There's something in us as storytellers and as listeners to stories that demands the redemptive act. Isn't that true? That demands that what falls at least be offered the chance to be restored. The reader of today looks for this motion, and rightly so, but what he has forgotten is the cost of it. His sense of evil is diluted or lacking altogether, and so he has forgotten the price of restoration. Look, this story, like so many of Jesus' stories, have this chilling sober component to them. You go, oh my goodness, people don't talk like that today, Jesus. Yeah, that's the problem, Flannery O'Connor is saying. If you lose that sense of evil, if there is no hell, then the wonder of heaven and the need that we have to get from one place to the other will be lost. We won't see the cost of it, and we will settle for what this world has to offer. But instead, what the good news of Jesus is at his cost, he has come and settled our accounts. Paul put it this way, you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. The utterly wealthy man has now given it all up to us. Listen, if he had been risk averse, he would have just stayed in heaven. Instead, he risked it all for you. He gave it all up, including his happiness, so that you might be a happy person, truly happy, ultimately happy, and not settle. And when we realize the cost that he endured for us to secure that cost, it changes everything. I mean, it lifts the guilt that we feel when we realize, that we have not been as responsible in life, in our work. We cut corners, we despise people who tell us to do things we don't want to do. We take advantage of people under us. Or in our relationships, maybe using people, entering into relationships where it's really just about me. We're not as responsible as we should do, but this lifts the guilt because he's at his own cost paid for it. So that it's not about our performance, that God will one day say, well done, good and faithful servant. Why? Because the ultimate faithful servant, Jesus, lived the life that we could not live and died the death that we deserve. And it's credited to our account that we receive by faith alone. It also helps us in that it transforms what may seem just a very heady thing, theology, from abstract or speculative theology to something that is spiritually intoxicating. Why? Because the Bible isn't just a list of good stories so you can be a more moral person. No. The Bible is a love story about the ultimate man who came and gave himself for you. The reason he went away is because those who were entrusted with his estate killed him. But he's coming back. He's coming back to put wrongs to right, but also to reward us and welcome us into his presence. John Wesley and I'm through with this. John Wesley and George Whitefield were leaders of the Great Awakening in the 18th century in both the UK and the US. They were not always the closest of colleagues, differed theologically a good bit. Wesley founded Methodism. Whitefield was an Anglican, kind of with Presbyterian blood. And yet, when Whitefield died, the great preacher of the Reformation, Wesley wrote a song. His brother, Charles, was the great hymn writer. But Wesley wrote a song in honor of Whitefield. And this is what it said. Slave of God, well done. Thy glorious warfare's past. The battle's fought, the race is won, and thou art crowned at last. Don't waste your life. Invest it fully with the riches of the one who was fully invested for you and risked it all. Because at last, he will crown you, welcome you into his presence, and say, come, enjoy the world of my happiness forevermore. Father, we thank you that you are the one who gives to us not only ultimate happiness, but you give to us all that we need to enjoy that. Help us to treasure the truth of what you have done for us in your Son, Jesus, that we might take the bags of gold, whether 1 or 20, that you've entrusted to us, and honor you with all of our life. In Jesus' name we pray.